Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
He said it with that same half smirk he's worn since high school, like everything out of his mouth deserved applause just because it was his. Let's face it, Travis said, swirling a glass of Cabernet he didn't even like. I'm the only one here doing anything innovative. The words floated above the dining table like a fart in church. No one dared move, but everyone knew it stank. The room went still. My fork hovered halfway between plate and mouth, speared into a slice of sweet potato like I needed something to chew on that wasn't his ego. I looked around, half expecting someone to roll their eyes or laugh it off, but nobody did. Not our dad, who had always treated Travis like the heir to a throne we didn't own. Not my mother, who glanced down at her hands like the mashed potatoes might offer divine insight. Not even my younger cousins, who used to hang off my every word when I ran a tech camp for them 5 summers ago. Now they just stared at Travis like he was Moses holding a new tablet. I opened my mouth, then shut it. I could feel the old habit creeping in, the one where I let it go, smooth it over, let Travis talk, and puff himself up because that's just how he's always been. But then, just when I was about to move on and ask someone to pass the rolls, Grandma, of all people, looked straight at me. She didn't raise her voice or even blink. Just tilted her head, gave Travis a sideways glance, and said, "So why did the Innovator end up reporting to you?" The silence that followed could have sliced meat. Travis blinked. His lips parted like he had a comeback locked and loaded, but nothing came. My dad cleared his throat. The dog whined under the table. And me, I smiled. Not big, just enough to keep it tight, knowing that right there, that tiny moment, that was the beginning of something. Grandma went back to her peas like she'd just commented on the weather, but I saw her eyes. She meant every word, and she wanted me to hear it. Now let me make something clear. This wasn't about ego. This wasn't about paychecks or office square footage or who drove what. It was about a lifetime of being told I was the safe one, the smart but not brilliant one, the steady Maggie, while Travis got to be the family's wild card, their little genius who thought differently, even when thinking differently meant torching every opportunity he touched. I had built my career brick by brick, taking no shortcuts, eating the humble pie that came with every boardroom where I was the only woman and half the room thought I was there to take notes. Meanwhile, Travis dropped out of college with a half-baked app and managed to burn through 2 seed rounds before he even knew what a balance sheet was. And yet, when his second startup collapsed, and he came crawling to our mother, it was somehow seen as a tragic setback for a visionary, not the natural result of a reckless boy playing CEO. That dinner was meant to be casual, just a Sunday with extended family, pot roast, green beans, maybe some football on in the background. But what happened at that table changed everything. Travis had been in my department for just under a year, technically as a strategic innovation consultant, though God knows what that actually meant since I was the one who had to translate his buzzwords into something usable. He came in through a backdoor favor pulled by a friend of our mother's in HR, and from day one, he acted like he was the damn CEO. He'd stroll into meetings late, interrupt people mid-sentence, and pitch ideas that either already existed or would take $10 million and a legal miracle to implement. Still, people listened to him because he was confident, because he was charismatic, and because, well, I guess the myth of the misunderstood genius dies hard. I let it go for months, told myself to focus on results, to be the bigger person, to not get drawn into drama just because my little brother wanted to play entrepreneur in a corporate sandbox. But that night, when Grandma, the only person in that family who never handed out compliments she didn't mean, turned to me and said what everyone else was too spineless to admit, it landed. Not like a punch, like a key. A little click inside me, unlocking a part I hadn't touched in years. The part that remembered every time I watched my ideas get repackaged and handed to someone else. Every time someone said, "Travis just has that spark," while I burned myself out keeping projects from collapsing. Every time I got passed over, paid less, asked to smile more, or told I needed to think more like a founder. And maybe I should have still let it go. Maybe I should have been content knowing Grandma saw me, even if nobody else did. But the look on Travis's face, the way it twitched just slightly, like a man who'd tasted something bitter for the first time, it fed something deep, something I didn't want to admit to having. Not jealousy, not even rage. Just the hunger to prove, not to him, but to myself. That quiet doesn't mean weak. That just because I don't shout about my wins doesn't mean I don't have them. That being the one who cleans up messes doesn't mean I can't start a fire of my own. You ever had someone in your family treat you like a footnote? Like you were just filling space until the real star showed up? Tell me in the comments if you've ever swallowed your pride at dinner just to keep the peace. For what? So people like Travis could pretend you weren't the reason everything stayed together? Anyway, that night ended quietly. Travis laughed it off, tried to pivot the conversation to some crypto thing he was advising on, but the mood never quite came back. People ate faster, the football stayed on mute. And me? I went home and poured a drink, sat on my porch, and watched the night settle in like I hadn't done in years. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew one thing. The next time Travis tried to take credit for something he didn't build, he wasn't going to walk away with just a bruised ego. You don't grow up in the same house as someone like Travis without learning how to stay 2 steps ahead. Not because you're afraid, but because you have to anticipate the moment he walks into a room and bends the atmosphere to fit his narrative, as if reality were just another version of the story he's telling himself. And the thing is, people believe him, not because he's right or even particularly insightful, but because he delivers every word with that unearned confidence that makes you question your own memory. Like maybe he really did invent something or lead some project you were sure was already in motion before he ever showed up. The irony of it all, of course, is that while he spent his teenage years breaking curfews and trying to charm his way out of summer school, I was in the basement studying for the SATs with a flashlight because I didn't want to wake our parents, hoping to carve out just enough space in the world to be taken seriously. I got my first internship at a tech company the summer I turned 19, working unpaid hours that spilled well into the night, answering emails no one else wanted to touch, and learning how to write documentation so clean you could run a product demo off it. I wasn't flashy, I wasn't loud, but I was good, painfully, consistently good. And while nobody put my name in the press releases, they always called me when things started to go wrong. That became my calling card. The fixer, the one who kept the wheels on, while others steered the ship into storms they didn't see coming. And it worked, for a while. I moved up. Slowly, yes, but steadily. I earned a reputation not for brilliance, but for reliability, and in the kind of corporate world I inhabited, that was sometimes even more valuable. Meanwhile, Travis floated through college like it was a side quest in a video game he didn't want to finish. He dropped out midway through his sophomore year because, in his words, school was too slow, which was code for nobody was handing me the keys to the kingdom. He came home talking about angel investors and pre-seed capital, throwing around acronyms like they were poker chips. And to everyone's surprise, including mine, he actually got funding. Not much, but enough to launch something. The product was a personal data aggregator that was supposed to help users control their digital footprint. It sounded noble, maybe even useful, but it was half-baked, unscalable, and riddled with security flaws. He burned through the funding in under a year and blamed market timing and the wrong advisors when it collapsed. What really got to me, though, was how the family reacted. Instead of calling it a failure, they called it a lesson. Instead of suggesting he get a job or take some time to reflect, they encouraged him to try again, because visionaries don't always hit on the first try. Nobody used that kind of language when I took an entry-level job after grad school, even though I turned down offers from more glamorous firms because I wanted to build something real. For me, the expectation was always discipline, consistency, caution. For him, risk, disruption, bold moves. He could blow through $50,000 on a dud and still be the golden child. I could bring in $3 million in new revenue and get a polite email thanking me for contributions to departmental growth. By the time he landed at my company, yes, my company, because while we technically shared an employer, The division was mine to run, and everyone knew it. He was on his third failed startup, still clinging to the belief that he just needed the right platform, the right exposure, the right audience to finally make his brilliance shine. He never said it outright, but it was obvious from day one. He thought the job was beneath him. He treated meetings like open mic nights, threw out big ideas with no backing, no structure, just a lot of passion and a PowerPoint template he'd downloaded for free. And worse, people listened. Maybe not everyone, and maybe not all the time, but enough to give him a foothold. That's the dangerous thing about charisma. It doesn't have to be grounded in reality to be effective. It just needs to sound better than the truth. He started talking to our VP of product, a decent guy named Ron who'd never seen a disruption he didn't want to fund. Travis pitched him some idea about integrating AI into customer service workflows, which, to be fair, wasn't a bad concept. But he had no roadmap, no data, and no understanding of the legal exposure it could create. Still, Ron got excited. He came to me after one meeting, eyes lit up, saying, "You should see what your brother's working on. It's got teeth." I smiled, nodded, and asked for the details, which of course weren't documented anywhere. That's when I realized Travis wasn't just playing pretend anymore. He was making a move. I should have shut it down right then. Should have pulled rank, reassigned him to something harmless, buried his proposal under a stack of regulatory guidelines until he lost interest. But I didn't. I let him keep going. Not because I was being generous, and not because I believed in him, but because I wanted to see what would happen if I gave him just enough rope. And more importantly, I wanted everyone else to see it too. See what happens when flash meets function, and function quietly steps back to let the chaos unfold. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to pitch a project to the executive board, and I was going to make sure he got that chance. Because sometimes, the best way to deal with someone who keeps walking around like he owns the place is to give him the keys and let him drive straight into the wall. There's a kind of quiet power in watching someone build their own downfall brick by brick, completely unaware that the ground beneath them is shifting with every move they make. And while I never considered myself vengeful, there was something almost meditative about sitting back and letting Travis dig himself deeper with each arrogant step, especially knowing that all I had to do was give him enough encouragement to think he was finally winning. I didn't push him. I didn't block him. In fact, I did exactly the opposite. I opened doors, removed minor obstacles, made a few phone calls I would have otherwise skipped, and I even put in a good word with Ron and the finance team to expedite his proposal review, all while quietly maneuvering the structure around him so that when the collapse came, there would be no denying who had built the tower and who had mistaken it for a throne. The thing about people like Travis, people who have been praised for potential their entire lives without ever delivering substance, is that they become addicted to the sound of their own promise. They confuse confidence with capability and assume that charisma will always cover the gaps in planning, in structure, in depth. So when I started playing into that illusion, feeding it just enough to keep his ego bloated and his vision unchecked, it didn't take long for him to stop asking questions, stop checking with me, and start acting like he was already in charge. I greenlit the initial prototype phase of his AI integration pitch, but I did it in a way that looked cooperative on paper and quietly sabotaging in practice. I paired him with 2 engineers I trusted, brilliant minds, both of them, but ones who hated unstructured chaos and were known for their methodical, rules-first approach. I told them, off the record, that this was a chance to see what happens when innovation meets execution, which they interpreted correctly as a polite way of saying, "Don't let this become a circus." At the same time, I nudged compliance to conduct a silent audit on any new tech initiatives involving third-party data handling, knowing full well that Travis hadn't considered how his AI tool would interact with customer privacy laws in states like California or New York. Then came the budget phase. I sent his proposal to finance with a smile and a note that said, "Excited to see where this leads." But I made sure the proposal still listed an outdated cost model from a legacy system we phased out last year. He didn't notice, didn't ask, just signed off and sent it forward. assuming that his passion alone would be enough to justify the numbers. And maybe in another world, it would have been if I hadn't already flagged the discrepancies in a separate email to our CFO, written in a tone that sounded helpful, not suspicious, just enough to plant the question, "Did you see this?" What I found most fascinating was how predictable it all became. Travis started walking into meetings like he owned the floor, tossing out buzzwords with such reckless confidence that half the room nodded along just to avoid looking out of touch. He referred to the pilot project as our launch, even though most of the team didn't understand what it was supposed to do. He scheduled brainstorming sessions and hijacked team updates, often opening his laptop and walking everyone through slides he hadn't vetted with anyone. Not legal, not operations, not even product. It was performance, pure and simple, and I let it play out because I knew that the moment the audience got tired of clapping, there'd be nothing underneath but dust. He started courting our VP of Strategic Growth, a woman named Lillian, who had a reputation for throwing her weight behind unicorn energy and turning pet projects into six-figure debacles. I saw them once in the break room, laughing like co-conspirators, and when I walked in, they both fell silent for just a moment too long. It didn't bother me. I smiled, said something neutral about the coffee being cold again, and walked out with my cup, leaving them to their little alliance. Because what Travis didn't know, and what Lillian was too impatient to consider, was that I had already scheduled a full executive review of all experimental initiatives for the next board cycle, and Travis's pet project was number 1 on the agenda. That's when I made the final move. I submitted a supplemental report, thorough, professional, and deeply detailed, on the projected risks of AI integration in client-facing environments. I didn't name names, didn't point fingers, just laid out every potential legal, financial, and reputational risk in neutral, bulletproof language that sounded like a concern for the company's future, not an attack on anyone specific. I knew that by the time the board saw it, it would read like a silent indictment, one that would leave them wondering how anyone had allowed this idea to get so far without tighter scrutiny. Travis, blissfully unaware, kept charging ahead. He booked a presentation slot for the next executive roundtable, sent out calendar invites with subject lines like innovation in action and transforming customer experience through machine learning. He was already designing mock-ups for the mobile rollout and drafting a blog post he planned to publish after the board approved funding. He even mentioned in passing how he was looking forward to leading the next evolution of our product strategy, as if the decision had already been made and I was just another cog in the machine he was building. I didn't correct him, I didn't argue. I simply nodded and said, "It's going to be a big day," because it was, just not for the reasons he thought. By the end of the week, he'd rehearsed his pitch 3 times in the main conference room, dragged 2 junior analysts into helping him with formatting, and asked it to make sure the projector didn't glitch mid-demo. He wore a new suit, bought a new notebook, practiced his opening line in the mirror, probably 10 times over, and I waited. Because sometimes revenge doesn't come in the form of a scream or a slap or even a confrontation. Sometimes it's just a quiet series of yeses, a trail of breadcrumbs that leads someone right to the edge of a cliff they were too proud to see. And when they fall, it's not because you pushed them, it's because they ran. There are moments in life when silence carries more weight than any word, when the quiet in a room doesn't just settle, it thickens, stretches, and presses itself against your ribs, like the air has turned into something heavier, more intentional, almost sentient in the way it demands attention. And as I sat in that glass-walled conference room, watching the board members settle into their chairs and click their pens with the nervous fidgeting of people expecting to be impressed, I knew exactly what was about to unfold, not because I could predict the future, but because I had laid out every variable with the precision of someone who had spent their entire career turning chaos into clarity for people who mistook her restraint for weakness. Travis stood at the front of the room, all bright-eyed confidence and pressed ambition, a little too eager, a little too rehearsed, flipping through his slides like a man convinced he was about to win something. not realizing that every word out of his mouth was merely accelerating the unraveling that was waiting just beyond his final click. He opened with a line that had clearly been tested on at least 3 coworkers. Something about reimagining the customer experience through intelligent responsiveness. And for the first 60 seconds, I'll admit, he had them. Heads nodded. Someone murmured, "Interesting." Ron leaned back in his chair like a man who had bet on the right horse. But then came the questions. And the thing about questions, real questions, the kind that come from people who've been in the trenches, who've seen what happens when excitement skips over detail, is that they don't care how passionate you are or how sleek your graphics look. They want numbers, timelines, protections, fail-safes, and above all, accountability. The first crack came from Elena, our VP of Risk Management, a woman who never raised her voice, but had the unnerving gift of making people regret ever speaking when she started in on them. She asked, in a tone so polite it was lethal, how the proposed AI tool would handle opt-out requests under California's consumer privacy law, especially for minors and flagged accounts. Travis blinked, hesitated, repeated part of the question as if buying time, then offered something about dynamic opt-in protocols, which, to anyone familiar with the regulations, meant absolutely nothing. I watched Elena's eyebrow twitch in that way it always did when someone tried to sell her a polished lie, and in that moment, the tone of the room shifted. Not loudly, not abruptly, but unmistakably. Chairs straightened, pens paused. People looked up from their notes, suddenly aware that the boy wonder might be skating on thinner ice than they'd assumed. Next came Derek from finance, a numbers guy through and through, who asked about the budget assumptions in slide 8, specifically why the model included maintenance costs based on the now-defunct legacy system. Travis glanced at the screen, stammered about preliminary data, and finally admitted he had used old infrastructure numbers for baseline comparisons. The phrase hung in the air like smoke from a match just struck, enough to suggest there was a fire somewhere, even if you couldn't yet see it. He glanced toward me then, not directly, not desperately, but with the flicker of someone who just realized he might be losing the room and didn't know where the leak had started. I gave him nothing, no smile, no frown, just a stillness that said, "Keep going." And he did. He plowed forward, voice tightening ever so slightly, talking faster, gesturing more, trying to spin the narrative back in his favor. But the questions kept coming, each one more surgical than the last. Compliance asked why the legal department hadn't yet vetted the external data sharing agreements. Marketing wanted to know how customer trust would be managed if the AI responses started to feel too invasive. And the CEO, a man who rarely showed emotion in meetings, finally leaned forward and said, "This seems ambitious, but where's the net if it fails?" And that's when I spoke. Calmly, deliberately, I said, "We actually conducted a parallel risk assessment last week." And I slid the folder across the table, the one with all the flagged issues, the unresolved compliance holes, the inflated cost projections, and the unapproved vendor access points that Travis had either missed or ignored. I didn't gloat, I didn't raise my voice. I just presented the facts, framed as support, framed as protection, framed as due diligence for a project that, in theory, still had potential, though everyone in the room now understood that the foundation was cracked before it even cured. Travis went quiet then, not frozen, not outwardly panicked, but still in that way people get when they realize the room has turned against them. Not with anger, but with disappointment, which, in a boardroom, is infinitely worse. He sat down without being told, tried to mask the fall with a nod, a thank you, something neutral, something not humiliating, but it didn't land. The CEO moved the meeting forward. The next presenter began, and just like that, Travis became invisible. Afterward, Ron pulled me aside. His voice was low, serious, not angry, just subdued. He said, "I thought he had it. Guess I missed the signals." I told him it happens, that's all. No lectures, no gloating, just acknowledgement. Lillian didn't speak to me. She avoided eye contact as she walked past, her heels clicking like accusations against the floor. And Travis? He lingered in the hallway, pretending to check his phone, waiting for someone to say something, maybe offer comfort, maybe apologize for not helping him out of the quicksand he had walked into like it was a victory parade. I walked past him, paused just long enough to say, "You presented well. We'll need to revise the framework, though." I gave him a soft pat on the shoulder, public, performative, enough for others to see, and then I walked away, leaving him standing there in a suit that suddenly looked too big, like it belonged to someone he hadn't quite become. Because that's what this was never about. Ruining him. It wasn't about revenge in the way movies tell it. Flames and screams and vindication in neon letters. It was about something simpler, quieter, more elegant. It was about holding a mirror up to a man who had built his image on smoke and watching him realize, in real time, that the reflection was hollow. And the best part? No one could say I'd done a thing. You'd think that after a professional collapse like the one Travis experienced in that boardroom, a moment so visibly, uncomfortably disastrous, it left not just a stain but a shadow, he might have retreated, regrouped, maybe even reconsidered the way he moved through the world. But if there's one thing I've learned about my brother, it's that the more fragile his grip on reality becomes, the harder he clings to the myth of his own infallibility, as though accepting responsibility would make the entire structure of his identity crack beyond repair. In the weeks that followed the presentation, he didn't rage or lash out or even try to blame anyone outright, which, honestly, might have made it easier to process. Instead, he went quiet in the way someone does when they're trying to rewrite the narrative in their own head before anyone else gets to finalize the ending. He started showing up to work exactly on time, no longer early, no longer loud, just present enough to avoid scrutiny, but no longer making noise, like a ghost who didn't know where else to haunt. The office felt different with him muted like that, as though a frequency had been dialed down and suddenly people could think more clearly without the buzz of his constant self-promotion vibrating in the background. His project was quietly archived. The AI initiative folder disappeared from the shared drive. His calendar dried up. No more meetings with Lillian, no more surprise presentations or informal strategy sessions. People stopped looking at him like he was a visionary and started looking at him like he was a cautionary tale. Though no one said it out loud, because office politics are rarely honest, and failure, when it's silent and undeniable, tends to make people nervous. I didn't go out of my way to rub it in, but I didn't cushion him either. We were civil, professional even. But that polite distance was louder than any confrontation we might have had. He tried once, just once, to start a conversation that hinted at reconciliation. It was 2 weeks after the pitch, late afternoon, the office nearly empty, and I was gathering up my things when he appeared at my door with that same old tilt of his head, the one that used to mean "Can I borrow the car?" back in high school. He said, "So that was a hell of a review, huh?" And he laughed like we were co-conspirators in some shared harmless failure. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to decide if I wanted to let him have that comfort or if it was time to stop cushioning the world for him. In the end, I said, it was thorough and nothing more. He waited, probably expecting a smile or laugh, or even a flash of that sisterly bond we used to have when we were kids, and still innocent enough to believe family would always be your safety net. But I just stood there, still and solid, until he finally looked down, muttered something about seeing me at the next team sink, and walked away without waiting for a reply. What followed was the kind of slow unraveling that doesn't make headlines but leaves deep imprints nonetheless. He wasn't fired, not officially. The company doesn't work like that. They're too careful, too PR conscious, too concerned with appearances. Instead, he was reassigned, first to a research role, then to a strategic analysis team that didn't really do anything but prepare slide decks for other people's ideas. He stopped getting invited to brainstorms. His badge access changed. Even his email signature lost the vague title that had once allowed him to operate without accountability. And still, he showed up, every day, like a man waiting for the tide to bring something back. At home, the fallout was more complicated. Family, after all, rarely watches a professional failure and keeps their opinions quiet, especially when pride and favoritism are baked into the very structure of how the family functions. My dad called me about a week after the board meeting. He didn't ask what happened, not directly. Instead, he said, he's still young. Maybe he just needs guidance. I nearly laughed, not because the statement was funny, but because it was so absurdly predictable, like hearing a scratched record repeat the same tired defense long after the music should have stopped. I didn't argue. I just said, "He's 35, Dad," and let the silence stretch until he finally sighed and changed the subject. But not everyone tiptoed. Grandma called me a few days later, her voice clear and crisp as always, no small talk, no pleasantries, just straight to the point. "I heard he fell flat on his face," she said, as if commenting on the weather. I told her what happened, in terms dry enough to keep it professional, and she listened without interrupting until finally she said something I'll never forget. "You didn't raise your voice. You raised your value. Good." I thought about that moment often in the days that followed, especially at the next family dinner, when the air carried the awkward weight of people trying not to mention what everyone knew. Travis was quieter than I'd ever seen him. Not sulking, not bitter, just deflated, like someone who had finally caught a glimpse of himself from the outside and didn't quite know how to process it. He didn't bring up work. He didn't make jokes. And when Grandma passed the gravy, she did it without looking at him, which said more than any speech ever could. Near the end of the evening, as dishes were being cleared and someone put on music that was a little too cheerful for the mood, Travis leaned over to me, his voice low and tight. "You set me up," he said, not angry, not accusatory, just baffled. I looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "No, Travis, you set yourself up. I just let it happen." And that was it. He didn't respond, just sat back in his chair, eyes distant, lips pressed together like someone trying to figure out how the rules changed without him noticing. The rest of the night passed in shallow conversation and forced laughter, but I felt something lift, not satisfaction, not vindication, just a kind of stillness, like the room had finally settled after a long, uncomfortable shift. Did I go too far? Maybe. But I also know this. Sometimes people need to fall before they realize they're not flying. And me, I finally slept through the night.